So thank you for joining us today. So far, the mood music from some of your Labour colleagues on what the Chancellor is planning is pretty positive. The Metro Mayor for Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, has heralded the 6.9 billion Sunak will commit to public transport as a breakthrough. Do you share his optimism?
Well, of course, new money for public transport, particularly in the north of England, and I'm a proud Leeds member of Parliament, is welcome. But what we want to see is the announcements backed up by actual delivery on the ground. If you take Northern Powerhouse Rail, for example, it was first announced 7 years ago and it's been re-announced 60 times since then. There hasn't been a single spade in the ground, not a single new train delivered. And so whilst we welcome announcements of new funding and new finance, forgive us if we're a little bit sceptical about the actual delivery of some of these projects in the north.
Now, in your conference speech in Brighton, which I mentioned, you spoke of how Labour needs to be a party of fiscal restraint, which will involve tough choices. So I wonder, will you be supportive, understanding if we see departmental cuts in the spending review?
Let's see what we get out of the budget on Wednesday. But after 11 years of austerity, many of our public services are at breaking point. Whether you are a child in a class size of more than 30, if you're one of the millions of people waiting for a hospital operation, or if you've been the victim of crime and waiting for justice, I think there are many public services that are in real need of financing and also proper plans to get them back on track. And what we've seen in recent months is plenty of tax increases for ordinary working people, but without the plans to improve our public services. Never have people been taxed so much and got so little in return. And so we want concrete plans from the government about how they're going to use taxpayers' money to actually improve our public services.
But where the tables turned, because we hear a lot about what the Tories are doing wrong, and it's interesting to hear what Labour would do. What would you cut if we look at all the pressures right now that Rishi Sunak faces? Where would you make those savings?
Well, there's likely to be additional money available for the Chancellor this week because the economy has bounced back faster than the OBR thought, although our economy is still smaller than it was during the pandemic. So I don't think it's going to be as tough a budget as previous budgets have been, perhaps, for this Chancellor. I've been clear that if I was Chancellor, my focus would be on tackling the cost of living crisis, helping businesses who have gone through a torrid 18 months and investing in some of the long-term challenges that we face as a country, particularly tackling the climate emergency, which also gives us real opportunities to invest in the skills and the jobs for the future, and also our plans to buy, make, sell more in Britain to drive that high-wage, high-skill, high-productivity economy that we all want to see. But Labour knows that will only happen by government working in partnership with business, not, as the Prime Minister seems to think, by creating shortages on our supermarket shelves.
Now, you mentioned cost of living. One of the things that Labour is calling on today is for the government to remove VAT from domestic energy bills in a way to soften the cost of living crisis. Now, that's something the UK would not do if it was still under EU rules. So is this policy a benefit of Brexit?
Well, the Prime Minister said during the EU referendum that one of the benefits of leaving the EU would be that we would no longer have to put VAT on fuel. There's a real opportunity now for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor to put their money where their mouth is. And at the moment, when people are facing an incredibly tough winter, with many families and pensioners feeling the squeeze, with the prices, particularly of essentials, food and gas and electricity, increasing, that the government could do something immediate and that would automatically reduce bills from next month. And that is cutting VAT from 5% to 0%. And we would pay for this. And I've been looking at VAT receipts over the last few months. VAT receipts have come in £2.2 billion more than what was anticipated and forecast at the last budget, in large part because prices, of course, have gone up by so much more than anticipated. That money could be used to immediately and automatically reduce the gas and electricity bills of every family, pensioner and individual in this country who is worried about rising gas and electricity prices right now. It's a practical thing that government could do.
So, in one way, you are seeing a benefit of Brexit, that policy. I wondered that something you talked about in your conference speech was this idea that you want to be the country's first Green Chancellor. So, a few things I think to send a signal there. I mean, something many have shied away from now is raising fuel duty. It's been frozen since 2010. Do you think it's time for a rise? That would send a strong signal ahead of COP26, wouldn't it?
No, I'm really very concerned about the cost of living crisis that people are facing at the moment. And I gave you the example before, Katy, about Northern Powerhouse Rail being announced all these times, but no better services for those of us who live and work in the north of England. So I think it would be wrong to increase those costs for ordinary working people when for many there is no alternative but to use the car to get to work. But there are things that government can do, and I set out Labour's climate investment pledge at our party conference. I think that the only way you can be a responsible chancellor in these times is to be a green chancellor, and that is certainly what I would endeavour to be. And I say that for three reasons. First of all, we have a moral responsibility to pass on to our children and our grandchildren a cleaner and greener planet, but also because the Office for Budget Responsibility say that if you delay and dither on the investment that is needed, the costs of meeting net zero will double if we delay by just a decade in taking action. Our economy will be smaller and borrowing will be higher to meet those needs to get to net zero. But also, I think this is really important and exciting as well. There's a huge opportunity if we invest in the industries and the skills of the future to ensure that there are good quality jobs in towns and cities across the UK, particularly in coastal communities and former industrial communities, whether that is building the batteries and the electric vehicles, whether it is in offshore or onshore wind, tidal energy, carbon capture and storage. That is what the £28 billion a year through the course of this decade that I announced at conference would invest in.
Sure, I understand that in terms of the funding. I suppose another thing a Green Chancellor could do is lead by example. So the cost of living crisis means perhaps some of the green push can't happen now, but we're also hearing a lot about heat pumps, really key when it comes to how we reach net zero is how we heat our homes. Not a single member of Boris Johnson's cabinet currently has a heat pump. Do you? And if not, will you commit to getting one?
I don't have a heat pump, and I don't have £10,000 lying around to buy one, even with the government subsidy. I do have an electric car, which we bought a year ago, which is great. Although I must say the charging infrastructure is a right nightmare, and often we get to charging points and they're all being used or they're not working. Much more is needed to improve the charging infrastructure in this country. But I tried to do what I can to tackle climate change. And one of the things I've done is when my car came to the end of its life last year was to buy a new one that was electric.
And just finally, Westminster's most infamous blogger, Dominic Cummings, has been at it again this week with a very long, as you would expect, blog. He suggested that Starmer is a dud and that Lisa Nandy could be the candidate to lead the party into the next election and beat the Tories. Do you think Nandy would make a good Labour leader, the Shadow Foreign Secretary?
I think Keir Starmer's doing a great job as Labour leader. We have substantially closed the gap between the Conservatives and Labour since our worst election defeat since 1935. On the big calls like the circuit break last year, Keir has been on the right side of the argument. And at conference, we set out some of our plans, whether that's on green investment, investing in mental health, making sure that every child has a good or outstanding school to go to. These are changes under Keir's leadership in our policies and in our structures to take us forward to the next election.
Sure.
Lisa's a great member of the team. We're part of a team.